They say nothing ever really changes in a quiet neighborhood like mine. But the moment he knocked on my door that Saturday morning, everything shifted. Like a page turning in a story I didn't know we were writing. I'd lived next door to Caleb for over 3 years. We weren't best friends exactly, not in the way people talk about soul-deep bonds, but we shared something more casual, more subtle. He borrowed my toolbox too often to be a stranger, and I borrowed his smile more times than I should admit. We had our routines. Weekend chats by the sidewalk, the occasional beer on my porch, shared complaints about trash pickup delays. Normal things, harmless things. At least, that's what I told myself. Caleb was the kind of guy who could walk into a room and make it feel like summer followed him in. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a laid-back confidence that made you forget your words mid-sentence. He always smelled like fresh pine and clean laundry, like someone who spent time outdoors, someone grounded. He had this ridiculous habit of ruffling his hair whenever he laughed, like he wasn't aware how good it made him look. I tried not to notice. I tried not to think about how my pulse tripped over itself whenever he called me man in that lazy, affectionate tone of his. I'm not sure when it started. Maybe the first time he leaned against my kitchen counter and talked about fixing up his backyard like we were two husbands designing a future. Or maybe it was when he helped me set up my new shower head and didn't blink when I told him he could use my bathroom while his plumbing was out. I was halfway through toweling off when I realized he'd seen more of me than I was prepared for. But that was weeks ago. We hadn't talked about it since, or maybe he hadn't noticed how weird I got afterward. I did what I always do, brushed it off, smiled, made jokes to fill the space. Caleb didn't push. He never did. And yet today felt different. We were headed out to a weekend cabin getaway. A group thing, supposedly. Some mutual friends had planned it, but one by one people bailed until it was just us. I should have canceled. I almost did. But when Caleb texted, "Still down for the trip?" With a winking emoji, I heard my heart say yes before my brain had the chance to argue. The drive up was easy. 2 hours of shared playlists, old rock mixed with newer indie bands we both liked. Caleb tapped the steering wheel in rhythm, singing, off-key with that crooked grin, and I found myself watching the road pass just to avoid staring at his profile for too long. The cabin was quiet, tucked into a grove of trees, its wooden frame weathered but charming. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a cozy living area with mismatched furniture that smelled faintly of cedar. The kind of place where silence could say things out loud if you weren't careful. "Nice, huh?" Caleb said, tossing his duffel on the couch. "Kinda perfect for a digital detox." I nodded, swallowing the nerves that were already gathering in my chest. "Yeah, peaceful." He stretched, arms lifting his t-shirt just enough to reveal the edge of a toned stomach. I looked away too late. "Dibs on the room with the lake view," he called out, already wandering down the hall. I followed, slow and quiet, the way someone follows a dream they're afraid to wake up from. It was just a weekend, just 2 guys alone in a cabin. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. And yet, when I stepped into the bathroom to unpack my toiletries and caught sight of the towel rack, the one we argued over once because he insisted on rolling towels instead of folding them, I felt something twist gently in my chest, something that said, "This isn't just friendship anymore, not for me." And I wasn't sure how much longer I could pretend otherwise. Caleb and I met the way most neighbors do. Awkward hellos over trimmed hedges, trash bins wheeled out at the same time, and those long pauses where you realize you've both parked your cars too close together. I just moved into the neighborhood. Back then, still unpacking boxes when he showed up with a 6-pack and a crooked smile. "Welcome to the quiet life," he said, handing me a beer like it was a peace offering. "Hope you like birdsong and unreliable Wi-Fi." From there, it was small things at first. Weekend barbecues with too much meat for one person, so I'd end up with leftovers he swore I had to rescue. He helped me replace a cracked fence panel. I lent him my pressure washer. Somewhere along the way, we started hanging out just because, watching late-night games, sharing random YouTube rabbit holes. laughing about things no one else would really understand. Caleb had this way of making every moment feel easy, like nothing needed to be explained. He always gave me a hard time about my coffee. "You grind your own beans like a damn barista," he'd say, wrinkling his nose playfully. "That's not normal, man. Just drink the stuff from the tin like the rest of us." "Some of us have standards," I'd shoot back, handing him a mug anyway. "Yeah, and some of us just want caffeine without the personality disorder." Stuff like that. Light jabs, shared grins. The kind of chemistry you don't really think about until it's the only thing you're thinking about. There were moments, small and quiet, that stuck with me more than they should have. Like the time we watched a thunderstorm roll in from my porch, and I caught him watching me instead of the sky. Or when he fell asleep on my couch, and I spent way too long trying to decide whether it was weird that I didn't want to wake him. The drive up to the cabin had that same familiar rhythm. Caleb was the one behind the wheel, as always, his sunglasses perched on top of his head instead of over his eyes. I offered to take a turn driving, but he waved me off with a smirk. "You drive like you're being graded," he said. "I want to get there while I'm still young." He always said stuff like that, teasing but warm, and I always laughed, even when my chest clenched a little at how easy it was to let him talk to me like that. When we got to the cabin, everything felt fine until we opened the bedroom doors. One of the rooms had a broken window, the glass shattered inward, probably from a fallen branch. A mess of leaves scattered across the mattress. Caleb tilted his head and blew out a low whistle. "Well, that's a vibe. Guess that means one bed," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced over at me, unreadable for a second, then just shrugged. "I don't snore, if that's what you're worried about." I wasn't. Not even close. But I managed to laugh. "Good to know. I draw the line at blanket stealing, though. Deal." He grinned and disappeared back into the hallway like nothing had happened. I stood there for a second, the weight of those simple words pressing down in my chest. One bed, one weekend, just us. We spent the rest of the afternoon unpacking and making half-hearted attempts at tidying up. Caleb found a stack of old board games in a cabinet and insisted we play even though half the pieces were missing. He made up rules as we went, clearly cheating just to get a rise out of me. I called him out on it every time, and every time he just flashed that boyish grin, like rules had never applied to him in the first place. At one point, I reached across the table to grab a missing die he'd dropped, and our hands brushed, just barely, but enough that I felt the spark shoot straight up my arm. He didn't pull away, but he didn't say anything either. Just looked at me for a second too long before clearing his throat and leaning back. "Hungry?" he asked. "I can throw something together." I nodded too quickly. "Yeah. Starving." That night, while he cooked and I set the table, I watched him move around the tiny kitchen like he'd been there 100 times. He moved with the same casual confidence he always had, but there was something softer underneath it tonight. He kept glancing at me, like he wanted to say something, like he was waiting for something. I told myself I was imagining it, that I always read too much into things, that he was just being Caleb. Still, when he handed me a plate and our fingers touched again, he didn't pull away. His eyes lingered on mine, and I could feel the breath catch in my throat. Neither of us said anything. Later, after dinner, we sat on the cabin porch under a sky scattered with stars. He talked about a camping trip he went on as a kid, how he got lost in the woods for an hour and thought he was going to have to live off pine cones. I laughed harder than I should have. He looked at me like I was the best audience he'd ever had. "Man," he said softly, "it's nice getting away from everything." "Yeah," I murmured. "It really is." And then we sat there in silence, shoulder to shoulder, just close enough to feel the warmth of his arm against mine. I didn't move. Neither did he. Somewhere in that stillness, I realized I was in more trouble than I'd ever let myself believe. The first night passed without incident, at least on the surface. We stayed up too late watching an old action movie Caleb found in the cabin's dusty DVD collection, both of us sprawled on the sagging couch, feet propped up on the coffee table. At some point, his foot nudged against mine and neither of us moved. The air felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fireplace. It wasn't until the next afternoon that things took a turn. We'd planned to take the trail behind the cabin that looped around the edge of the lake. Just a short hike, something to get us moving after a morning spent lazily flipping through magazines and making sarcastic commentary about celebrity gossip. Caleb packed a small backpack with water bottles, granola bars, and a half-dead flashlight, just in case, and I grabbed my jacket, even though the sky was clear. At least it had been. We were about 40 minutes into the hike when Caleb noticed his phone had zero signal and laughed. Guess we're properly off-grid now, kind of freeing, right? I smiled tightly. Sure, unless we get lost. He raised an eyebrow, grinning. Please, I've got an excellent sense of direction. 10 minutes later, we were lost. Not lost, in a dramatic wilderness survival kind of way, but the trail had looped off in two different directions, both equally unmarked, and we'd taken what Caleb called a gut decision. It turned out his gut wasn't great with maps. By the time we realized we were circling the same thicket of trees, the sky had darkened, not from time, but from clouds that had rolled in fast and low. The temperature dropped quickly, and I felt a shiver roll down my spine as the wind picked up. Then came the first rumble of thunder in the distance. Okay, I said, glancing around. Now it's less freeing. Caleb looked up at the sky. All right, yeah, maybe we need to head back. The drizzle came before we'd even started retracing our steps, light at first, then steady enough to soak through my sleeves. The trail back became muddy, slick with wet leaves, and by the time we reached the cabin's clearing, we were both damp and breathless. Caleb pushed the door open and held it for me, his eyes catching mine as I brushed past. I felt the heat of his gaze even though I was chilled to the bone. Inside, the cabin was warm and dry, cozy, but everything felt sharper, closer, like the world outside had blurred, and now only the two of us existed. Shower's yours, he offered, running a hand through his soaked hair. You look like a drowned cat. I gave him a look but headed to the bathroom, grateful for the excuse to escape the tension building in my chest. The hot water felt like a small miracle. I stayed under the stream too long, hoping it would wash away the confusion, the want, the aching swirl of thoughts I couldn't shake. When I stepped out, wrapped in a towel and damp hair dripping onto my neck, Caleb was standing in the hallway, shirtless and barefoot, holding a fresh pair of socks in one hand. Didn't know if you packed extras, he said, holding them out. Your feet get cold. It was such a simple thing, such a Caleb thing, and it hit harder than it should have. Thanks, I said, taking them from him. Our fingers brushed again, and this time neither of us laughed it off. He looked at me, really looked. His gaze lingered on my face, my shoulders, then flicked away so quickly it almost didn't register. But it did. Every second of it. I'll take mine now, he said, voice suddenly quieter, and turned into the bathroom. I stood there for a moment, heart hammering in my chest, socks forgotten in my hand. That night, the broken bedroom window meant we had no choice but to share the remaining bed. We'd joked about it before, but now it felt heavier. I changed into an old t-shirt and sweats while Caleb was still brushing his teeth, then climbed under the covers and lay stiffly on one side, facing the wall. I heard him enter the room a few minutes later, felt the bed shift as he got in beside me. We didn't say anything for a while. The silence filled the room like fog, thick and electric. You awake? He asked finally, voice low in the dark. Yeah. Kind of a weird day, huh? I let out a quiet breath. You mean the part where we almost reenacted a survival documentary? He chuckled, the sound soft and sleepy. I meant the part where you didn't complain once. I thought you hated the cold. I do, I admitted, but I didn't want to ruin it for you. The silence stretched again. Then, I like hanging out with you, you know, he said, almost like it was an afterthought. I rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling. Yeah, same. More silence. Then his arm brushed mine under the blanket, bare skin against bare skin. He didn't move it away. I froze. not in fear of hope. The heat of his arm next to mine felt like a question he wasn't asking out loud. My fingers twitched, tempted to shift just a little closer to close the inch of space between us. I didn't. I couldn't. What if I ruined everything? You? Cold? He asked, not moving. A little, I whispered. A pause. Then I felt the blanket shift, his hand tugging it up higher over both of us. His voice was even quieter now. You should have said something sooner. He didn't move away. Our arms stayed pressed together. Every breath I took was deliberate, measured. Every second I felt more aware of him, of how close we were, of how much I wanted to turn and face him, but I didn't, because if I did, I might say it. I might say everything, and if he didn't say it back, I wasn't sure I'd survive it. So I stayed still, letting the tension hum between us, letting my heart thud out every word I couldn't say. The only thing more terrifying than wanting Caleb was the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to want me too. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the warmth of his arm beside mine, heard the rhythm of his breath just inches away. The nearness was torture, beautiful, aching torture, and I kept replaying every moment, since the hike. The touch of his hand, the look he gave me in the hallway, the silence that stretched between us like a thread too tight to pull. By the time morning light filtered through the curtains, I was still wide awake, my body tired, but my thoughts sharp and spiraling. Caleb stirred beside me, one arm thrown over his eyes. He always slept like that, messy, comfortable, like the world couldn't touch him. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, the soft part of his jaw where the stubble grew and uneven. He looked peaceful, and it made my chest ache. I slipped out of bed quietly and went to the kitchen to make coffee. I needed something to do, something to hold, something to stop myself from unraveling completely. The kettle hissed to life, steam curling into the cold morning air. I leaned against the counter and stared out the window, watching pine trees sway in the breeze. I didn't hear him come in until his voice broke the silence. You always make the strongest coffee. I turned and found him leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, hair still tousled from sleep. He wasn't wearing a shirt. My heart immediately betrayed me, skipping a beat, and I hated how obvious it must have looked. It's the only way to. Drink it, I replied, turning back to pour 2 mugs. Anything else is just bean water. He laughed softly and stepped closer, accepting the mug I handed him. For a second, our fingers touched again, and again. Again, he didn't pull away. It was like we kept orbiting this thing, getting closer and closer to whatever it was we weren't ready to say out loud. We drank in silence, standing shoulder to shoulder. Outside, the trees swayed. Inside, everything in me was tense, buzzing. You didn't sleep much, he said, not looking at me. I shrugged, sipping my coffee. Neither did you. He didn't argue. Instead, he set his mug down and leaned back against the counter. You okay? That question. So simple, so casual. But there was weight behind it. Like he knew. He knew. I wasn't. I looked down at my mug. Yeah, I mean, not really. He tilted his head. Want to talk about it? And for a second, I almost said no. I almost swallowed it down again, like I had every time something flickered between us. I almost convinced myself it was safer to stay quiet. But then I looked at him, really looked, and the pressure cracked. I don't know what we're doing, I said, voice low, unsure. Or maybe I do. Maybe that's the problem. He didn't speak right away. His eyes were fixed on mine, unreadable, like he was waiting for more. You keep doing these things, I continued, the words coming faster now, tumbling out. These small things, like brushing my hand, giving me your socks, standing too close. And maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just you being you. But it doesn't feel like nothing to me. It's never felt like nothing. Still, he didn't say anything. I took a breath, heart racing. And if it's just me, if I've been misreading everything, just tell me. Please. Because I'm losing my mind over here. The room went still. Caleb set his mug down, slowly. His eyes dropped for a second like he was gathering something up inside him, and when he looked back up there was a crack in his expression I hadn't seen before. Something vulnerable. Raw. You're not misreading it, he said quietly. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a rush. Then what is this? What are we doing? He rubbed the back of his neck, gaze flicking away, then back to mine. I don't know, I didn't plan for this, I didn't mean for it to feel different. But it does, I said. Yeah, he admitted, it does. A silence settled over us again, but this time it was different, charged, open, like a window had finally been thrown wide. I thought it was just me, I whispered. He gave a quiet laugh, but it wasn't amused. It was tired, honest. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that I was just imagining it, that it was easier if we stayed like we've always been. But it's not easier, I said. Not for me. He looked at me again, and something shifted in, his face something soft and careful. I've been scared, he said. Not because of you, but because of what it would mean if I let myself want this. My chest tightened. And do you? He nodded, slow. Yeah, I do. The moment hung there, heavy and alive between us. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know what to do with them, so I just stared at him, feeling every inch of space between us like a wall I didn't know how to break. Caleb stepped forward. Just one step, but it felt monumental. His voice was softer now, barely above a whisper. I don't know what this means yet, he said. I just know I don't want to pretend anymore. My breath hitched. I don't either. He looked, at me really looked, and in that second everything broke open. He reached out, tentative, his hand brushing my jaw. It was the lightest touch, but it set off sparks across my skin. His thumb hovered near my cheek and I leaned into it, just barely. Okay, he asked, so gently. I nodded and that was all it took. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't rushed or messy or desperate. It was soft. Intentional. The kind of kiss that says I see you. I've seen you this whole time. His hand cupped the side of my face and I reached for him, fingers curling into the fabric of his t-shirt. The kiss deepened slowly like neither of us wanted to stop. Like we'd both been waiting far too long. When we finally pulled apart, we didn't go far. His forehead rested against mine, breath warm against my skin. That wasn't nothing, I whispered. No, he said, voice steady. That was everything. I felt like I was floating, like something heavy had been lifted off my chest after carrying it for so long. And when he pulled me into a quiet, careful hug, my arms wrapped around him without hesitation. We stood there, in the kitchen of that old cabin, wrapped in each other like the world had suddenly realigned. It hadn't fixed everything. We still didn't know what came next, but for the first time the fear wasn't winning. He held me a little tighter, then murmured into my shoulder, So, do we just keep pretending we're still lost? I laughed, really laughed, and it felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. No, I said. I think we finally found it. The coffee went cold, untouched on the counter. Neither of us moved for a long time. We just stood there, arms around each other, breathing in sync. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full, charged, like the air between us was finally aligned with everything we'd been too afraid to say. My fingers rested against his lower back and I could feel the quiet rhythm of his heartbeat. It was fast, like mine. That alone made me feel a little less alone in the chaos of it all. Eventually, Caleb leaned back just enough to look at me, his thumb brushing against my cheek again like he couldn't help himself. His voice was soft when he spoke. You look like you're still processing. I gave a small smile. I am. I think I'll be processing for a while. He nodded, but his lips quirked up. Should we sit? Or are we just going to stand in the kitchen hugging like we're in a rom-com? I nudged him lightly. You say that like it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it is, he said, backing away just far enough to grab both our mugs. But if I'm gonna keep kissing you, I need caffeine. Emotional breakthroughs are exhausting. I followed him into the living room, heart still hammering but slowly settling into something more grounded. He dropped onto the couch, motioning for me to join him. When I sat down, he handed me my mug, then stretched his arm across the back of the couch like it had always belonged there. When his fingers brushed the edge of my shoulder, I didn't tense up this time. I leaned in, and he let them trail down to rest gently at the curve of my arm. It was subtle, but it was everything. I keep thinking about all the times I almost said something, I admitted quietly. He turned his head toward me. Like when? I thought for a moment. That night we watched that dumb horror movie and you pretended you weren't scared but jumped 6 inches at the cat in the closet. I wasn't scared, he said, indignant. I was startled. There's a difference. Sure, I said, smirking. Anyway, you grabbed my hand and didn't let go for like 20 minutes. He laughed, his hand tightening on my arm. I was hoping you wouldn't notice. Oh, I noticed, I said. I just didn't know if it meant anything. It, did, he said, more seriously now. I just didn't know how to handle it. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, like we were both sorting through the past with new lenses, trying to piece together a puzzle we'd only just realized we were building. He shifted slightly, turning to face me more fully. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you scared? The question hit a little deeper than I expected. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands, then back up at him. Yeah, I said honestly. A little. He nodded. Me too. But not enough to wish we hadn't said anything. His eyes softened. No, not even close. We sat there for a while, letting it all settle. At some point, he tugged a blanket over us. His arms stayed around me, our legs brushed lightly under the fabric. It was easy. Easier than I'd imagined this part would be. I keep thinking about what happens when we go back, I said eventually. He didn't flinch or pull away. Yeah, me too. You think it'll be weird? He tilted his head. Probably, but honestly, I think everything was already weird. We were just pretending it wasn't. I chuckled. That's fair. I don't have all the answers yet, he continued, voice softer now. I don't know what I'm going to say to people or how this fits into what I thought my life was going to be. My heart stung at the honesty, but it didn't break. You don't have to figure it all out right now. He looked at me. Really? Looked and nodded slowly. I know, I want to try. With you. Hearing that out loud made my chest feel lighter. Not because it solved everything, but because it meant we were on the same side of whatever came next. I want that too, I said. A beat passed. Then he grinned. You know, I'm never going to let you live down the fact that you confessed. First. I groaned and shoved his shoulder playfully. Are you kidding? You dragged this out for months. I should get an award. He laughed, head tipping back slightly. You'll get a trophy. Best in confessing. And you'll get most oblivious, he nudged me. I wasn't oblivious, I was emotionally constipated. Wow, I deadpanned. Romance is alive and well. But even through the sarcasm, I felt his fingers tighten a little around my arm. His thumb brushed lazy circles against my sleeve, and the warmth of it settled into my bones. It was strange how quickly everything had shifted, and yet how natural it felt now that it had. We weren't dancing around it anymore, we weren't pretending. As the morning sun stretched across the floor and the coffee cooled again in our mugs, I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder. He tilted his head to rest against mine. We didn't need to say much else, we were here, together, and whatever came next, we'd figure it out. One step, one morning, one quiet moment at a time. 2 days later, the sound of suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floor echoed through the apartment like a quiet reminder that the bubble we'd built was about to pop. Our little getaway, meant to be nothing more than a weekend to help him unpack, had somehow unraveled something much deeper, and now we were standing on the other side of it, changed. Caleb stood by the front door, slipping on his sneakers. I watched him from the kitchen, my fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of tea I hadn't touched. The morning light filtered in through the blinds, striping the floor and catching in his hair. He looked relaxed, maybe even happy. But there was something else in the way his eyes flicked to me, quick and uncertain, like he wasn't sure if this was the part where we went back to normal, or if there was a normal anymore. He caught me staring and gave me a crooked grin. "You look like you're about to write a dramatic goodbye letter." I snorted. "I might. Depends how poetic I'm feeling." He crossed the room and leaned against the counter beside me, his hip bumping gently into mine. "You think this was just a vacation thing?" I turned toward him. "No, I don't. Do you?" He shook his head without hesitation. "No, I just don't know what the next step is." I reached out and fiddled with the edge of his hoodie sleeve. "Maybe we don't need to know all the steps, just the next one." He watched my fingers for a moment, then looked up and nodded. "Okay, what's our next step?" I smiled, then took his hand and threaded my fingers through his. His skin was warm, his grip familiar already. "This." He exhaled like he'd been holding something in for hours. "Yeah, this works." We stood there, our hands joined between us like something simple but strong. There were no grand declarations or cinematic kisses, just quiet certainty, something we hadn't had before. "I want to come visit you next weekend," I said. Caleb's eyes lit up. "Yeah? I'll even pretend I like your weird oat milk lattes." He grinned. "I knew you were secretly obsessed with them." "I'm not," I lied. And he laughed, the sound settling somewhere deep in my chest. Outside, his ride pulled up. The engine idled, a soft hum that reminded us both that time was ticking forward, whether we were ready or not. He glanced over, his shoulder then back at me, his smile fading into something gentler, more serious. "Can I kiss you before I go?" I answered by leaning in. It wasn't a long kiss. It wasn't rushed either. Just enough to feel real, to say this isn't ending here. When we pulled apart, he pressed his forehead lightly to mine. "We'll figure it out." "We will." He turned to go, but just before stepping through the door, he paused and looked back. "Oh," he said, with a smirk. "You still owe me a trophy, remember?" I rolled my eyes. "For what?" "Best in confessing. I expect it to be shiny." "You'll get a gold star," I replied, "if you're lucky." He laughed, and with that, he was gone. I stood in the quiet apartment, still clutching the heat of his hand in mine like it might linger, and in a way it did. There were still things to face, questions, conversations, moments that would make us second guess or worry, but they didn't feel as heavy anymore. Because now I wasn't standing alone. A week later, a package arrived at Caleb's door. Inside was a small wooden plaque, hand-carved and slightly crooked, with the words, "Best in Confessing," awarded to Caleb for finally getting there. He texted me a photo of it immediately, laughing, crying emojis filling the screen. Underneath, he added, "Trophy's nice, but I think I already won." I didn't respond right away. I just smiled, heart full, and started counting down the days until I could see him again, because this was just the beginning.